He found her on the trading post porch like a punctuation mark, still, deliberate, as if the town moved around her and had been taught to be careful. Dust lay in the sun like fine ash. People brushed past with baskets and curses and business, eyes sliding off her as if she were a shadow they didn't know a glance. Only the breeze knew to pause where she sat, lifting the edge of her shawl and letting the light touch the pale seam of skin at the throat. Elijah Cole had the way of men who had learned to measure loneliness by the creak of their own porch. He'd come into town for supplies, barbed wire, a sack of oats, a new bit for the mare, and because trade gave him something like company, sharp conversation, commerce, the brief trust of strangers. He saw a lot on those trips. He missed less. But something about the stillness on that porch snagged at him. It was wrong to be that quiet in a place made for noise. He slowed his step and watched her. Small movements, how she kept her hands on her knees, how her eyes looked past people, said the rest. He knew a look like that. It was the look of someone keeping the world at bay by not offering anything to take. He set his pack on the post and sat a careful distance away. "You need a place?" he asked, because it was the only kindness that made sense, the one that had kept him company all the years he ran a ranch. You saw a thing that needed seeing, and you did the small thing you could. She didn't meet him right away. When she spoke, it was short. "Work for board." "Same as anyone." His voice had been used on hired hands and wilder guests and the widow down the lane who'd lost her boy. It sounded like that here too, plain, practical. He offered a hand, not to drag her out of where she sat, but to let her find something steady. "Cole Ranch, west of the creek. You'll get a bunk and chores." Her fingers curled around his and stayed like a bird finding a branch. She didn't smile. She accepted. "If this answer reaches you and you were Elijah, what would you do? Leave your answer in the comments." They rode back in the late light, the town shrinking behind them to rooftops and a single steeple. The ranch lay along a low stretch where the land folded into the creek. The porch leaned with age, and the barn smelled of hay and horses. Elijah kept an eye on her as if the land itself needed to be introduced. "This is where the wind comes from. This is where the horses will be. This is where we measure time by the milk pail." Niche moved like someone who had spent a very long time learning how a place might take or give only what you let it. She learned the names of the mares in a morning, the shout for the feed and the rhythm of a halter. She had fingers that folded around rope and notched the knot with the economy of someone who tied knots for reasons that had nothing to do with sport. She ate fast and watched the doorway while the rest of the world chewed. At night she left her oil lamp rimmed low and slept with one hand near the edge of the bed, as if to test the world for danger in the small hours. There was an order to those days. Dawn brought milking and mending, the slow, honest labor that wore hands into a kind of language. Elijah watched her by habit at first, how she had a way of calming a skittish colt by turning it loose and letting it find him, how she could read a mare's ear and know what had spooked it at a glance. It pleased him, this practical competence. Pleasure had become a small thing in his life, measured now in the sound of a door closing after supper, in the way the creek sang through the winter. He was careful not to pry. He'd learned that secrets could be holy and dangerous in the same breath. But there were the little things that raised questions. The way her gaze skimmed the horizon at dawn like an old habit. The way she registered a distant hoofbeat as if mapping the world for threats. Once, while mending a fence, he caught the flash of a pale line where cloth had slipped at her shoulder. A burned seam, almost hidden. He said nothing for then. Nisha's face closed like a book. A week later, they found a foal abandoned in the high grass, cold and wild-eyed. Elijah had suggested leaving it. Small creatures invited trouble on his ranch. Niche did not argue. She wrapped the foal in a blanket and held it close, humming a low sound that had no words and steadied the shaking animal in minutes. He watched until his throat felt tight. She handed him the foal with a steadiness that said she had cradled other things more dire than a hard-broken newborn. The creek did a quiet work at their edges. In its steady passing, nights claimed their small rituals. Once, after mending gates, they sat on the porch with cups of coffee that had gone cold and shared none of the small talk that townfolk considered essential. Elijah felt it like a peace and a challenge. She was present and absent at the same time, a person who kept so much behind a wall that the act of living beside her felt like trespass and grace both. Tension has a way of arriving in small breaches first. A week out, a rattler slipped from the high brush into the path where Elijah and Nish were rounding the east pasture. It was a thin, pregnant sound. The horse reared and backed, breath thick. Elijah's hand reached for a rifle, more reflex than plan. Nish stepped ahead and did something they didn't teach in the feed yard. In a calm that was all business, she nudged a stick to the serpent's side, then with a sweep she killed it with her knife. The blade flashed and the snake's body went still. No drama, no ceremony. Just the efficient, clean end that comes from a life that measures death by necessity. He watched her then the way you watch a corner of the mind you have never opened. "You know how to," he began. "Survive," she supplied, soft. The word had no bitterness, only a dryness like the dust. He wanted to ask how. He wanted to ask who. He thought better of it. That night, they talked under a sky dense with stars, the kind of sky that tells stories to people who listen. Elijah found himself telling small things, about his father, who had taught him how to plant corn by the moon, about a brother who'd left and never come back. He rarely gave that away. She answered in short pieces. She had been on her own for a long time. Names could get you killed. The mark made people look at you differently. Her shoulder had been visible when she bent to a task, the cloth riding a little askew. A faint, jagged scar curved there, skin puckered and paler than the rest, arranged in a pattern that might have been deliberate once, a burned symbol or a name. She didn't wear it like a warning so much as a thing she's learned to walk with. "I've smelled men tracking me," she said finally, the words gone flat as tin. "They come for what they think I carry." Elijah felt something like a cold wind. "What do they want?" She looked at him. "Claim," she said, "or what they think claim will do for them." It was a small answer, and it put islands between them like stakes. Then the night came when shadows arrived on the horizon with a pushing sound, horses biting the dark, torches prying at the edges of the field. Elijah was the first to see them, a line of bodies black against the moon, moving with that patience of men who have been told they will be paid if they keep walking. Nish felt it too, the way she stood straight, the way a hand went near the empty place at her shoulder. They shouted her name as if shouting would call up names from the air. It rolled over the fields. The men came with a hunger in their voices. "There she is. Bring her." They had the look of people who had been given a reason. They had a bounty, a promise, or the blunt greed that gathers like a cloud. Elijah stepped forward because he had to. There is the moment in most decent men when the ledger flips and what they had counted as a solitary life trades places with the person in front of them. He had fed himself on solitude, but he would not see the other suffer it for his complacency. "Get inside," he told Nish. She didn't move. Her eyes were calm and hard and far away, like someone hearing music only she could parse. "No," she said. "I won't run into someone else's yard. If they want me, they can come." They came. Torches beat thrown light across the yard. Men dismounted, hooves panting. One of them, heavier in build and wearing his anger like a coat, walked forward and spit at the ground near Nish's boot. "You carry the mark," he said, and the way he said it meant more than the words. "That brand belongs to the red claim. Men will answer for it." Nish swallowed, then drew her shoulder into a space of exposure as if to take the truth and lay it bare. She let the shawl fall. The burned symbol was a jagged, dark pattern, a remnant of heat and scar tissue that settled into the curve of her skin like a secret letter. It did not sparkle. It did not glow. It lay there as a simple fact, that someone had marked her, probably in pain, and by that mark others said she belonged to a story she did not choose. Elijah felt the world narrow to that place of skin. Surprise traveled through him like a fist. Her shoulders mark shocked him because he had expected only the small, practical things of someone looking for work. He had not expected a sign that made men come with torches. "You're making a mistake," he said to the leader, a man whose jaw worked like it had been trained to both chew and issue orders. "She is a hired hand. She has no claim on nothing." The man spat, then smiled, a slow, unpleasant smile. "Marks don't lie, old man. Some marks came from the fires of law. Others came from men who wanted a name to carry. Either way, her shoulder tells a tale. We answer to the ones who want it back." The first knife cut was small and mean, meant to startle, not finish. Niche didn't flinch. She moved like water, a motion honed by necessity. There are those who will tell you the Western fight is a noisy thing, but true violence has a hush that comes over it, a tautness like a string about to snap. She fought with the same economy she used on the ranch, one step, one parry, a movement that put a man off balance. Elijah's hands were not strangers to work, but he had not had to take a life. He wrapped a horse rein around a wrist and used his weight to throw a man to the ground. It was crude. It was enough. Men fell. Torches went out. Horses reared and stamped, and one loose bullet ricocheted off the barn. The leader lunged. Niche moved under his arm and took his weight like a knot unfastened. In the tangle, her sleeve slipped and the brand showed in the torchlight like a dark map. The leader saw it and swore. "Take her," he said. "Kill the old man if you have to." They didn't kill the old man, but they did not leave friends either. In the end, the leader's horse took a step back and his men with it. Something like common sense wrapped itself around their greed, too much risk for unclear rewards. They swung back into the dark and rode, leaving a field reeking of sweat and fear and the small copper scent of blood. In the morning, the ranch looked battered and alive in a new way. They moved in the aftermath with a hush. One of the men who had come was dead under a wheel, a face pale and calm now. Another lay where he'd been pushed and died without ceremony. Elijah did not cry. No one did. They washed what could be washed in the creek. Hands, the hem of a shirt, the streaks of blood that had spattered the porch. Niche knelt by the water, her palms bold as if they had been through a lifetime of such washing. "Tell me what it means," Elijah said when the work was done and the sun had warmed the boards. He had borne witness. That made him someone who could ask. She looked at her hands, then at the mark. "My father," she said, "left me that and a story that men turned into a law. It is not a treasure." Her voice cracked like a twig. "It's a claim, a name someone carved that tied him to a tract of land. Men who think ownership can be carried on skin will take it to mean they own what he couldn't keep. They think the mark will bring them what my father was promised. They will kill for it." Elijah sat with that. The ranch, the creek, the steady swath of land he'd tended. What was it in the ledger of men that made them chase a mark on someone's skin? Greed had many faces. He'd known them at auctions, at judges' court when deeds were read. Nothing noble had guided those faces. "You expected this?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I expected to wander. I expected to move. I did not expect a roof to make men come." He felt an ache. The idea of protecting a roof had been his for years. He had always been practical in his keeping, but protection meant choice. There were men who would put a price on harboring someone others sought. There were losses that came by association. "Leave," he said at last, then corrected himself with the smallness of an apology. "Or stay. I won't ask you to stay if you think you'll ruin this place." She looked at him then in a way that unbuttoned something inside him, her gaze drifting over the porch, the creek, the barn. "I don't want to bring ruin to you," she said. "I've been a shadow. I don't want to be the reason for more blood." He put his tools down. The sun warmed his hands and the boards of the porch the way it had warmed them months and years ago, before a scab of loneliness had formed. "We buried 2 men," he said. "They came for what they thought they could own. We killed in defense. You could leave and I would not follow. Or you could stay and we could bury this together. I won't pretend we can make the world soft for you, but I won't turn my back either." She reached for the hem of her shirt and touched the scar like someone testing the shape of a rock in their palm. For a long time, she said nothing. When she spoke, the words were small and steady. My father said a mark makes you known. It makes men remember. He said remember not always meant kindness, but he also said you could decide what you were known for after the mark. That doesn't mean it won't bring trouble. And if I choose to stay? Elijah asked. If you stay, you will be choosing to keep a person who brings trouble, she said. You'll be choosing someone who will make the nights longer and the ledger heavier. I can't promise you peace. Peace isn't what I thought I wanted for years, he answered. I wanted quiet. Quiet is different than company. They buried the men at the edge of the pasture where the pines stood thin and the ground was forgiving. Niche handled the spade with the same economy as she handled a foal. Elijah dug, set the bodies low, and when the last earth fell, there was the simple smallness of closure. They didn't say much. The wind sat with them, asking no questions. When it was done, Niche washed her hands at the creek, the water taking the red and leaving skin that shone like new leather. She tilted her face to the sun, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw something that wasn't guardedness. It was an outline of trust, tentative, thin, but it was there. You could leave, he said finally, because the question had to be asked again in the language of choice. You could move on. She looked at the land the way one inspects a map. I could, she said. But I spent a lot of years as a thing to hide. I'm tired of hiding. Then she did something he had not expected. She stepped closer and took his hand. Not a request, not an act of desperation, a quiet transaction. He felt the scar of her palm and the small calluses where work had been faithfully done. He had, in his life, been offered many partnerships, business exchanges, debts repaid. This felt different. This felt like being chosen. If you stay, she said, almost to herself, I will not be a burden you didn't expect. Then stay, he said. If we are to make trouble, let us make it together. The days afterward were small acts of mutual making. They fixed the gate that the riders had broken, patched the roof where a torch had singed the eaves, tended the mare, and fed the colt. The mark remained on her shoulder, a fact acknowledged like weather. Men in town still glanced, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with the same hunger that had once sought a name to own. But more often they looked to the porch and saw two figures moving through feed and labor, and they learned to see the shape of company. Some mornings at dawn, Elijah would find Niche on the porch with a cup of coffee, her gaze keyed to the way the creek glinted. Sometimes he would join her and they would sit without a word, letting the world name itself in the sound of water. Once, when the wind offered up a scent of coming rain, she leaned her head on his shoulder for a breath that felt like an apology and an acceptance all at once. The future was not a promise. There would be more riders, perhaps. Lawless men do not forget sharp advantages. They had choices ahead, whether to fight, to hide, to move. But a kind of belonging took root in the small decisions. The choosing to bury what needed burying together. The choosing to tell the truth plainly when it mattered. The choosing to watch over one another at night. Elijah had come into town to trade and left with something he had not expected. A life that complicated the quiet he treasured. Niche had come to a porch and found a place that asked something of her besides secrecy. The brand that had once made men hunt her became, in the contour of their days, only one line of a longer story, marked skin held in the steadiness of shared work. They stood once at the rim of the pasture, the horizon wide and unclaimed, and watched the wind run its hands across the grass. He slipped his hand into hers and felt the steady heat. I don't know what will come, he said. Neither do I, she answered, and the truth in that was something like comfort. They turned back to the house together, footsteps in a shared rhythm. The ranch listened and did not judge. The creek kept its steady speech. The mark that had shocked a lonely rancher became the hinge on which a different life swung, one that would require courage, cost, and the willingness to be seen. They had made a choice to stand in it. If this story of unlikely refuge and hard choices moved you, Subscribe for more and join us as we tell other quiet, fierce stories.